Welcome, everyone. My name is Jill Harani, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Metazoa. Welcome to the Metazoa Live Reset Button, where we chat with influencers in the Salesforce ecosystem. This episode of the Reset Button is called The Importance of Org Management, and we have Tom Appleton, who's the VP of Sales at Metazoa. Excuse me. And we have Andrew Montemayor, who is a Salesforce System Architect at Exalta. Thank you both for being here.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
There you are. So, Tom, let's start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the VP of Sales at Metazoa, and I've spent about the last 15 years working for Salesforce partners who have been selling, some type of application on the App Exchange that helps technical people, like Salesforce admins manage their orgs. So this has been a passion of mine and something that I've, an ecosystem that I've worked in for a pretty long time.
Great. Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, as you said, I'm the system architect for a company called Exalta. And Exalta is a global manufacturer of chemical coatings. So they're one of the industry leaders in that market. And I've got an org, roughly around 5,000 users that I get to take care of.
Wow, that's large. All right. Well, the title of our session is The Importance of Org Management, why it's important to keep a tidy org. Tom, before we start, and I just also want to say, anybody who's joining, please put message any questions you have. I'm pretty sure I can figure out how to see them. So, and if we don't get to your questions, we will after the session. Tom, what is org management exactly? What would you define it as?
Yeah, well, I think it means something a little different to different organizations depending on what their needs are. But essentially, I think on a high level, it's taking care of the day-to-day things to keep your org running smoothly, running efficiently, and to keep it moving forward in terms of, being able to roll out new features, being able to get user adoption, and those kind of things. So a lot of times, org management is about, getting rid of what we like to call, and Salesforce often likes to refer to as technical debt. Getting rid of all those things in your org that are barriers to your org running smoothly and to getting adoption. This could be, unused metadata like, email templates that are no longer being used, or fields that nobody's putting information into, or reports that, were created but now just sit around never being run. It could be things like, your security model. So, your profiles and your permission sets, you could have bloat there, or you could have improperly assigned security, giving people access they don't need, or giving people access they shouldn't have, which is even worse. It could be things like getting your releases put together correctly. Your release management side of things, so that you're rolling out the latest updates and features and fixes for the org that your organization needs to move forward correctly. So it really spans kind of the full gamut of, keeping your org tidy, keeping so that you don't have a lot of bloat and unnecessary features, but also keeping your org running efficiently, so that as your organization moves forward, Salesforce continues to not be a hiccup, but rather an enabler for you to move forward efficiently.
Super. Thanks for that. Andrew, do you have anything to add or anything different that you would say about
Yes, absolutely. So everything that Tom said is 100% correct. Technical debt, cleaning up, making sure that you don't have a bunch of legacy stuff just clogging up the pipes. But I look at it from a slightly different perspective, in that my job revolves around proactive management of an org. So I try to put systems in place that are going to prevent all of this technical debt from accumulating in the first place. So that part of that is to establish good governance for your org in just general terms. So it's how you reuse existing assets instead of just creating new ones because you have a new requirement. Governance is a whole topic all amongst itself that could spend a long time talking about, but it goes a long way towards good org management, and following best practices, quite frankly, is part of governance. So if you can work to prevent the creation of bad metadata or unnecessary metadata, it makes technical debt less of a concern down the road. The last thing you want to do is spend all this time and effort eliminating technical debt just to create more on the front end because you're not paying attention to what you're creating. Right. So for me, org management is big picture before you even create a solution in your org, and then also the cleanup after the fact.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening or listen to this later would love to hear some of your best practices at Exalta. Do you want to share some of those?
We can definitely do that. So to give you a little background, when I first started with Exalta, they had just moved into a standard Salesforce org. Previously, they had been in a Force.com org, which is not a standard setup, right? And Force.com was a platform where you could develop for yourself all this great configuration, but you didn't get the standard stuff that Salesforce comes with out of the box. So that was a very old org that came through DuPont. When Exalta split off, they got the org and realized that it was just not sustainable. So they did a lift and shift over to a full Salesforce org. And unfortunately, that work was not done so well. So part of what I was hired to do was to start putting structure in place. And as I mentioned before, governance goes with that. And I think this tags on to what Tom had mentioned earlier, was release management. So there's a whole process, from the time you get a requirement from the business to the time you're actually pushing configuration into production. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen there. And best practice falls into how you review your issues, right? So if you get a requirement from the business, what's your process to handle that? And for us, we have a multi-stage review system set up now. And that goes from initial review with the business, help us understand your requirement. What do you need? Don't try to hand us a solution. And that's the problem I see a lot with other orgs, is that the business will come to you and say, here's what we need, and here's how we want you to do it. That's great to a certain extent. However, we can't expect our business partners to understand the full workings of a very complex system. So really what we encourage our business users to do is just give us your use case. What do you need to do that you can't do today? And then we're going to take that back and talk with our internal team to find out what is the best solution for you to use. So part of the review is that initial discussion with the business, understand the requirement. Once we have that, we actually have 3 weekly meetings with different teams that work on Salesforce. We've got our regional team, which is the first touch. So if your issue was submitted for a particular region, the regional team would pick it up, discuss it, and see if there's initial feedback that might affect how we approach that particular requirement. And that could be something like, hey, we've already got something like that. Why don't we leverage this? Or if you do this, you're going to break my whatever, right? Whatever the process might be, you're going to break it. So that initial review is super, super important. Then for being a global org, I have to take it out of the regional team and put it into the global basket and share that with our global team. When you've got one org supporting multiple regions and multiple business lines, you do run the risk of stepping on each other's toes. So that's where these review processes come into play. And we actually even instituted an architectural review for the more complicated issues, to where I've got my senior team that works with me to review and give advice on best practice. So when we talk about org management in general, how you proceed through your solutioning is super, super important before you even touch your production environment. So I don't want to get too long-winded on that topic, but that is probably the number one thing that we do at Exalta to really help smooth out and keep our org healthy is by talking to each other, communicating, making sure that what you know is shared with the rest of your team so that together you can come up with the best solution, not just a solution.
Right. And I think it kind of goes without saying, but when people don't have best practices like this or anything like remotely close to this, what kind of consequences would they see? Because I'm sure you've seen them.
Yes, I have. So the kind of consequences you see are, like I said, you have competing solutions. So two entirely different sets of configuration that ultimately achieve the same goal is a waste of resources. That's actually technical debt, right? You did not configure correctly in the first place. Now you have potentially fighting solutions. They could complicate each other. Another thing that I've seen a lot of, unfortunately, is when you don't have best practices and governance in place, you get these mystery components just showing up that no one quite understands where they came from or why. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into our system and actually in production see a field called test. Doesn't do anything, doesn't have any configuration really on it. It's just there. And then, of course, when you go back to the team and say, anybody know where this came from? Silence. So it's just a matter of, if you don't have good control of who gets to do what and a good understanding of what you should versus what you should not be doing, you're just going to accumulate a bunch of garbage that, quite frankly, can just get in your way. The cleaner you keep your org and the more organized it is, the easier it is for you to maintain.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so,
I would say
go ahead.
Sorry, Jill.
It's okay.
I was just going to say, I think from our perspective as a tools company, we get companies that come to us from a couple of perspectives. We have companies that come to us that are already in a, maybe a terrible state when it comes to org management and technical debt. It's, sort of piggybacking on what Andrew said, they come to us and they've got an incredible amount of stuff in their org that's not configured properly. It's not being used. It's bloat. It's technical debt. And they're looking to, coming to us looking for a way to clean that up, to identify it. It's really where tools come into play in the picture, right? If you have a large enough org, if you get orgs the size of Andrew's or even bigger, just understanding where those problems are, it's almost impossible to do manually from just a human perspective, to crawl through and figure it out. So you got to have the right tools to help you identify where those problems could lie and bring those to light. So we get people really from those two perspectives, the companies that come to us for it. And then, as Andrew said, we also have companies that are looking for a way to sort of prevent these problems from occurring down the line, putting processes in place and tools in place that help bring this stuff to light so that it can be tackled and managed properly so that it doesn't grow into a monster. It's really an inevitable process as orgs grow and as orgs become more complex. You either have to have processes and tools in place to help tackle that, or you're going to, end up with those things. And, as Andrew pointed out, some of the problems, but, we've seen a whole myriad of things that, orgs in that state, problems that they suffer from it. For example, we've seen people trying to move to Lightning, and it's causing performance issues just because of the number of stuff on layouts and other things. They're trying to really optimize the org before they move to the new Lightning, interval, not new anymore. But and then, we also see it as a barrier to adoption, both for new features in the org, but also to getting people, onboarded. It actually becomes a problem for Salesforce themselves, because for their growth within a company, because if you have a lot of these problems, they can be barriers to your ability to roll out new features, to fix problems. So it really is a comprehensive issue for anybody that's going to have a Salesforce org that's going to grow into a certain level of complexity.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Andrew, I know you actually use our tool, Snapshot, and I don't want this to be a super salesy thing. It's more educational. But how do you use, from a tool perspective, what are some of the things that you use, or how do you use our tool, Snapshot?
Yeah, so I mean, the reason behind us even evaluating Snapshot was exactly what Tom said. We have this amazingly complex org that we knew was not in a very healthy condition, but it was so big and so complicated, we didn't even know where to begin to evaluate it. You can use Optimizer, but even a few years ago, Optimizer was not so hot. So you can run Salesforce Optimizer. It's a great tool, and it gives you some really nice high-level evaluations of where pain points might be. The thing that I like about Snapshot is they have a whole suite of metadata analytics that are just amazing. And I can drill deep, deep, deep into my metadata and let the tool do the heavy lifting for me. So, for example, this one report called Forgotten Assets is outstanding because in a few minutes, I can run an evaluation of my metadata and the tool surfaces all these things that just are not being touched, right? They haven't been opened or accessed in ages. And it's a really, really quick and easy way for me to take a quick look and see, okay, is there any low-hanging fruit here that I can just clean up and get it off my plate? If I'm working on a big project, is there any kind of work I can do in association with that project to help my org? And these types of reports, this metadata analysis, to me, is the most valuable piece of Snapshot. It does deployment. We use it for our deployments. It's fantastic at that. I like the fact that I can actually visualize my metadata inside of these reports. So it's not just giving me a list. It's an actionable list. It's something I can actually work with. I can drill into. And I'm one of those admins that's, I think they call it an admin-eliper. So I like to dabble in the code.
Yeah.
So being able to actually look at the metadata, understand why things are the way they are, Snapshot helps me do that. So to me, the metadata analytics, that alone is worth the price of admission.
Yeah. And Tom, maybe you can talk a little bit about how our tool actually helps you find it, and what does it mean, fix it, like find it and fix it. Is it
Yeah.
truly, like, can you truly fix it and, have everything be
Yeah.
changed in your org? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, as Andrew pointed out, there's other tools out there that can give you a high level look at where some of your problems are in certain aspects of your metadata. But that doesn't, I mean, that's, maybe one step of the way there, but then you have to go fix the problem, right? And sometimes the fix is really incredibly painful too, in terms of how much time is consumed. You know, I could just give a few examples. Like the Forgotten Assets report that Andrew gave us, it can tell you across any type of metadata what's not being used. So you might, depending on your company, you might have a lot of unused, groups or queues or roles or email templates or reports or whatever it may be. But once you discover that, you've also got to go eliminate it. So what we've done is we've actually put, those release tools that Andrew talked about, we've actually built them into the workflow of the report. So for example, I could run a report and see, okay, here's the 150 email templates that aren't being used in our org. And then with a click, I could instantly build a job list to go ahead and delete them. Rather than, leaving and going out to another tool and manually trying to get all that 150 into my job list, hoping I don't make any errors, or going and deleting each one manually inside of Salesforce. We can actually let you do that with one click. And because, we're capturing all that metadata as a way to analyze it, we can roll it back too if you have an oopsie moment, which is also really big. When you get into an optimization phase on your org and you're cleaning up some of the debt or some of these problems, you also want to be able to, cover your mistakes And so, having that for a backup to roll back. So we like to say, find it, fix it, and then maintain it. And that's really where we've tried to spread our tools. One side to really find the problems, another piece to actually let you give you that a lot of your time back by letting you efficiently fix those problems. And then lastly, giving you, using a lot of the same tools, the ability to keep checks and tabs on it as you move forward, so you don't maybe revert back to that state where you started, where you have a lot of that debt or a lot of those problems. So we really try to spread it across those three things: find it, fix it, maintain it.
Okay, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, that some companies struggle, say, with moving to Lightning. I imagine, Andrew, because your org was so old, when it was time to move to Lightning, did you struggle at all with that?
It was definitely a challenge, and we're just now starting to get ready to cross the finish line. So we literally took over 2 years by
Wow.
the time we moved everybody. And part of that is cultural. It's not even just
Oh.
the limitations of the system, or, because we had that period of time where Lightning didn't do everything that Classic did.
Mm-hmm.
And you always have the user saying, well, I have to go back to Classic because I need to do this. Fortunately, those gaps have all pretty much been eliminated now. All of the big ones, anything that made sense to say, yep, I got nothing. Go ahead, go back to Classic. I get it. Not anymore. Now we've closed those major gaps, and now there's no reason for our users not to be in Classic. However, what I quickly realized working on a global org is it's not only technical roadblocks, but cultural roadblocks can also play a big part. Some of my areas are just inherently resistant to change.
Yeah.
Don't like change, and they will just put on the brakes. So what we had to come up with was really a big campaign to help spread the word about how awesome Lightning is and how much easier it is to do things, how much more customizable it can be to help you do your work in a much simpler fashion. And that is not an easy sell to make. I mean, it looks great. For the longest time, Lightning was rather slow.
Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't even say, hey, it's lightning fast. They would just laugh at you. So it's getting better. And like I always told everybody when we first started this journey was, give it time. Any new technology takes time. It will get better. And it is. It's getting better. And quite frankly, the new features that they constantly roll out that are lightning only features now, well worth the effort. But yeah, it continues to be a bit of a hurdle, but fortunately we're closing that last gap in our final region. And it really is amazing to me. And my experience has been, without fail, once we introduce Lightning and make people use it, and they get about a week into it, takes a week. The first week is, oh, this is so slow, or, oh, I can't find anything, and where's this, and this doesn't work right. Well, it's because you're doing it wrong, but that's just because you don't know. After that week, when we go back for additional feedback, pretty much without fail, the feedback is, yeah, you're right. This is pretty cool. Like this. Love this over here. This is great. And could we do this? And can we do that? And as soon as you start getting the requests for customization, for new features, that's when you know you've reached good adoption, because people are interacting with the tool and then asking for more. And that's the thing that I love about Lightning. It's so easy for us to enhance and to give people more with very little resource. So the journey was difficult, but well worth it.
Yeah, it's always shocking to me, actually, when I hear that people are still struggling with going to Lightning. But as you said, it's not just the move to Lightning, it's also getting people to make that change. I know I kept going back to Classic every time I wanted to run a report, because I'm like, I don't know how to do it in Lightning. I know how to do it in Classic.
Yep.
So you touched on it a bit, but where was most of like the biggest source of technical debt that you were struggling with?
Oh, without a doubt, code. It goes without saying, especially when you came from a platform or where over. They didn't do a whole lot of cleanup work at that time. So now we have a bunch of old code, some of it not commented well. No one really understood why it was there to begin with. So code is the most difficult technical debt to eliminate. And it is by far probably the number one offender, right? It's so easy to write a snippet of code and just put it out there. If it's not commented well, let's say my development team today is not my development team tomorrow. I've got a new set of developers, or maybe a vendor created that for me. And now that vendor's gone. My support team is going in trying to figure out what the heck they did. And this goes back to governance. We require all of our code to be heavily commented. It's got to be there. When I go and I review it, if I don't see the proper commenting, I send it back. Nope, not acceptable. Because if I can't have a brand new developer step in, read that code with the comments and understand why it's there, what it's supposed to do, and how it's supposed to work, I'm wasting time, right? Time I don't have. So code is number one by far, quickly followed by profiles, permission sets, custom fields, validations, you name it.
Yeah. I've heard of companies just in conversations that don't have any of these best practices in place. Maybe they're an accidental admin even, and they come in and they really don't understand the importance of something like this. Tom, you must talk to a lot of people about, like, they're coming at a point where they have not put these best practices in place. They don't have maybe the type of commitment, or maybe even it's manpower. But talk to me a little bit about some of the conversations you've had and some of the effects of people not having some of these best practices.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned before, if you don't put them in place, if you have a Salesforce org, especially one that's growing and becoming larger, it's an inevitable roadblock that you're going to hit. And we see, as I noted before, we see companies at all different phases of that. They've hit the roadblock and it's a critical issue to them. They know it's a problem and they're trying to get ahead of it. But we also see a lot of people that know it's a problem, but they sort of run into the issues that you noted. They either don't know how to start, don't have the resources to do it. A lot of companies have a lot of turnover in terms of our experienced turnover in admins, or like Andrew said, they've had orgs that have transitioned between different teams to own them. And so they're totally in the dark about what came before them. We talked to a company last week that, they had hired this new admin team to really fix the org, because before that they had 11 different sets of admins in 6 years. Wow. In the org. And each one had their own projects or things they created or tried to fix or didn't fix, and they were just really in the dark about it. So I think that's, a key place where tools come into play. It's impossible to, live in the past and know what everything that's happened in an org, especially one that's older. But there are good tools out there like ours that can help you, identify where those problems are. But to Andrew's point, it's critical to tackle it from both sides. One is from a tools perspective, so you can address the problems. But the second is also from a process perspective, putting the right process in place so that you can handle these things going forward. Because as soon as you fix it all, the never-ending march towards the problems happening again, start again. And having the right process in place going forward. So it's a little bit of what we do as a company too. Is we are a little bit of a business process consulting company in terms of how we sell our tools. That's because we give a lot of people tools, but we've also seen so much of this that we try to provide some advice on ways they can use those tools and put process in place that they can, once they've fixed the problem, they can keep it under wraps going forward. They can keep it under control.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, I was listening to something the other day where they were talking about technical debt. They were also talking about how some people actually think, they look at their org and they're like, this is a mess, let's just start over. Have you ever heard of anybody talking about starting over?
All the time. All the time.
Yeah.
And there may be actually a point, even with the right tools and the right process and everything, where that makes sense. Certainly I've seen Salesforce orgs evolve into a place where, maybe a reboot and migration of the proper things out of the one org into the next, but really starting from the ground up might make sense. It could actually even be a time saver for some companies to do that versus trying to fix where an org's particular state is. But you'd be surprised how often we hear that. But there's other things that affect that too. Acquisitions, mergers, things like that. People, they've acquired a new division, and now they've got two Salesforce orgs. The one that's the org for the division, and then they've got their org. But they want everybody in one place. They don't want to maintain two orgs. So now you've got to do an org merge. To me, those are all parts of the same problem. Doing an org split, doing an org clone, doing an org merge, they're all different flavors of the same problem. It's taking all that metadata data, business process and all of that and getting it combined together in some way that makes sense and doesn't create roadblocks or extra work for extra people. So definitely another place where our tools, I think, have a strong focus is helping in those areas as well. We get a lot of companies that come to us when they've acquired a company or they're splitting off a division or something like that. And a lot of these same problems we've talked about managing your org, really come into play when you're merging an org. You got to think about all these things and how they all fit together.
Right. Mm-hmm. Andrew, did that happen to you guys? Were you considering starting over?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, especially when you have a large complex org and you consider it to be a mess, there's a frustration point that you're going to hit. And you start looking around going, I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
It's like, where would I even start to tear this apart? And fortunately for us, we were in a situation where, yes, there were a lot of bad decisions made previously. And down to the role hierarchy kind of level. So you're talking about security. And when you talk about security, that is an incredibly complex piece of the system to look at, because there's so many things that can affect record security, right? The security of your data. So as we were looking at that, a couple different things came up. So the first one was, we have multiple business lines in multiple regions, and everybody wanted to do things their own way. No, we've always done it this way. We're going to do it this way, and we want to do it this way. So one discussion was, do we split into multiple orgs? And that way we have one org for each business. At the time, reporting against multiple orgs was not really a thing. So that was a big strike against that whole notion. But then, the other piece of that was, then you need resources to support each of these orgs. You need to pay for each of these orgs. It's an incremental expense, which made no sense, quite frankly. So that went off the table. And then the second topic of discussion was, do we just start again? And I think that was quick and easy to dismiss because they had just done a reboot. Going from the platform org over to a full Salesforce org was essentially a reboot. Mm-hmm. That was their opportunity to do a lot of correction. And unfortunately, the vendor that was hired to do that didn't advise them in that direction. They didn't have anybody around at that time that could say, whoa, you need to stop before you invest all this money and resource time into this move. Take advantage. This is your chance to restructure and to fix and step into best practice. Didn't happen. So that means that we had this full Salesforce org, which was still in a pretty bad condition. And the only path forward was to fix it. And that actually ended up being a very wise choice because we have such good, strong processes in place. The last thing you want to do is have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to make very foundational changes. And yes, it is taking a long time. And yes, it eats a lot of resources. However, if you compared that to the overall cost and maintenance of multiple orgs or just starting again, believe me, if you've got a foundation to work with, even though it seems like there's no way I can make this work, it is possible. You just need to bring in the people that can look at an entirety of an org, right? And understand where are the pieces that you can start to pick this apart. It's like undoing a knot. You have to keep picking at it until you get that one piece that breaks free, and all of a sudden it starts to unravel. That's what we've been doing. And now I'm finally at that point where I'm starting to see things unravel. And we're getting buy-in from leadership, which is the single most important thing you need.
Right.
If you don't have your leadership driving this discussion, forget about it, right? As IT, we can sit here all day long, stomp our feet and say, no, this is wrong. This is the wrong way to do it. It's not best practice. You're doing things that are unhealthy. Yeah, who cares? I'm just IT. I'll just run the system.
Right.
But when the business leadership comes along and says, this doesn't make any sense. Why do we have all of these various processes when we're a global company? We're one company. Yes, we have multiple business lines, but can't we globalize? Can't we reach agreement across our regions that say, here's how we want to do things as Exalta, which we did. We have global leadership buying in now, and they're saying, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. As soon as that happened, whole topic changed. The whole mood changed. Now we've got buy-in from the business, and we're making just amazing progress. So we're in the process now of rebuilding our role hierarchy from the ground up. We're rebuilding our territory hierarchy from the ground up. We're rolling out some basic functionality like forecasting. Never had collaborative forecasting before because the role hierarchy was such a mess. Now we fix these problems and we get to take advantage of some standard features that were just unavailable to us before. So yes, we definitely had that discussion. Do we just jump ship and try again? Thankfully, we didn't choose that. And now we're starting to see the fruits of our labor.
Yeah. It sounds kind of geeky to say it, but it's exciting to kind of hear you say that, how I liked your metaphor of the knot and kind of keep picking at it until it starts to unravel. So would you say then a couple of your suggestions would be start off with best practices and also make sure you have leadership buy-in?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, if you don't have that foundational work in place, like I said, triage. First thing you have to do is stop the bleeding. So that means you've got to put your system governance in place. You have to start adopting best practices. Until that is there, you can't expect to go fix stuff and not have it just break again. If you're not controlling who's doing what in your org, then what's to say you fix this over here and someone else comes along over here and just changes it again? So yes, you have to have those foundational pieces in place first.
Yeah. I always wonder why people don't, when they first start off with their brand new shiny org, why they don't have a tool or these best practices in place. And I guess a lot of times maybe it's because leadership doesn't really understand that it's super important to have the buy-in and
That's part of it. Yeah, that's part of it. A lot of it's experience. Quite frankly,
Exactly.
until you've been in a position where all of a sudden you're looking at this going, oh no, that was just really bad. We should not have done that. If you can't work off of your experience, then you're guessing. And this system is way too big, way too complicated to just come in on day one and know it. Right? You have to live it.
That's
So
totally
I
true.
think that's, yeah.
Totally true. I mean, we run into companies that both of these scenarios have played out. I've talked to companies before where they're a more kind of a new Salesforce org, and they've got so many irons and so many fires getting everything launched and getting everything going, getting everything up and running, that the thought of the long-term org management and the problems it can cause by not having it just sort of get kicked down the road. But on the flip side, we've also had companies that have brought in experienced Salesforce admins who have experiences with orgs that have grown and become complex and the problems that come there. and they're looking for tools to help solve those problems out of the gate. They don't have those problems yet. They're a brand new Salesforce org. They haven't started developing in any scale anyway that technical debt, but they also understand that if they don't get ahead of that wave, it's going to crash. And so I agree 100%. It's an experience thing. I mean, if you just look at the way that Salesforce works as a system, it's something that if you ignore it, it will happen. It's inevitable. These problems are inevitable. So getting ahead of it's always a great thing to do. Now, that said, a lot of the companies that come to us because they woke up one day and they're in a mess.
Right.
But there's no question that if you can get ahead of it, if someone's watching this and they're in a situation where they are launching a new Salesforce org, thinking about these problems now is important because later you can find yourself with a real mess to clean up before you can really tackle it.
Right.
Yep.
So I didn't see any comments come in, but I'm wondering if that's my problem. So if there are questions, do both of you, are you okay with people reaching out on LinkedIn or something to ask you some questions and get, some more information from you?
Yeah, sure.
You
I've
bet.
got no problem with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Any last bits of advice before we close this out?
Tom, you got something?
Yeah, mine would just be what I left with there before, that, as far as org management goes, thinking about it sooner rather than later is important. And if you're struggling with it and you're in that state, like where Andrew was, where they were, at that pivot point where they need to figure out what to do, there's a lot of resources out there that can help you, and tools out there that can help you. So don't be afraid to look for help. Don't give up.
Yeah.
And it's a huge community. And I think the lesson that I learned immediately when I started working with Salesforce was ask the community. The Trailblazer community is probably the most amazing resource ever when it comes to managing a system. When I say experience helps to understand the system and to guide you, there are years and years and years and years of experience out there. And everybody that I've ever known that works with Salesforce is more than happy to talk about it. They're more than happy to help with problems, to answer questions, and to give just overall guidance. Use your user groups.
Mm-hmm.
Leverage your user groups. Get to know the people that are in your area. I mean, if you're not reaching out to the community, you're missing out on your single most valuable asset. That's my recommendation.
Very good point. And I guess now, because a lot of people are still doing them online, you can join a user group pretty much anywhere.
Anyway.
And leverage that community. Yeah, good stuff. Well, thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everybody who joined. Don't miss our next episode on October 12th at 10 a.m. Pacific, where Bill Appleton will be talking about understanding technical debt on the Salesforce platform. I know we talked a little bit about that today, but he's going to really get into it, and you can check it out. Check out the little blurb on exactly what he's going to cover on our website under Metazoa Live. And thank you both so much.
You're very welcome. Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.